and welcome to Astronomy 100. In this particular segment, we're going to continue on with our exploration of the origins of understanding of astronomy. In previous segments, we talked about how there was this belief that the Earth was the center of all things and that everything in the universe revolves around the Earth, and how it was very difficult to prove otherwise. We then ventured into the territory of how it was ultimately suggested that perhaps the Sun is the center of all things and that the Earth is a planet that revolves around the Sun, and how this very correct but courageous idea was one that was very difficult for people to accept because it requires you to adopt this idea that the Earth is a moving body. But during the period of the Renaissance, we find that there is an attempt to try to put forth this idea that we call heliocentrism, and to be able to support the idea that the Sun is the center of all things and that the Earth is indeed a planet. When we were last together, we talked about how Copernicus was able to suggest that in a sun-centered model, or a heliocentric model, the Earth being a moving body better explains how you observe the nighttime sky, because you get retrograde motion explained without the need of complicating epicycles or anything related to this very complicated movement that the ancient Greeks suggested. Now, the person we're going to discuss today is Tycho Brahe. Tycho Brahe was a Danish astronomer, and he was born in 1547, and you can see in the middle of the 16th century, and he lived right to the end of the 16th century. And what we find is that the period of time that Tycho lives is one where we still have a geocentric universe. We still have the colleges of the day and the era being ones where they teach geocentrism. The idea that the Earth is the center of all things is not one that is going to go away just by a simple change of the way that we think about our universe. But what we find is that Tycho Brahe, although he is not somebody who brings a new idea to the table, what Tycho Brahe is able to do is to bring various observations that would later be used to support the heliocentric model. Tycho, as I said, was born in Denmark, and he was born into a very wealthy family. And because he was born into wealth, he was able to spend his time going to school, learning about the ways of the universe without worrying about where his next meal was going to come from or a way to earn an income. Many of the astronomers of the Renaissance were not ones that were paid very well. In fact, it's surprising to find out that many of the astronomers of the Renaissance were actually paid to be astrologers. People were more interested in their horoscopes than they were interested in learning about our universe. So Tycho Brahe comes along, and he's able to go to college and learn about all things related to the ancient Greeks, and along the way he learns about geocentrism, the idea that had been taught for thousands of years by this point. And Tycho was really kind of interested in astronomy because he was just fascinated by the sciences. Now, at 13 years old, when he goes to college, it was quite extraordinary that somebody that young was able to go to college. But again, his family was wealthy and he was part of the aristocracy. A year later, when he's 14 years old, something would change his career path quite substantially. And that is that Tycho Brahe witnesses a partial eclipse of the sun. And what really got his attention was how this was one of the rare eclipses that was predicted ahead of time. By the time of the Renaissance, the scientists of the day were starting to unravel the nature of eclipses, and they had figured out how to predict upcoming eclipses. And so this partial eclipse of the sun was one that was predicted ahead of time. And Tycho Brahe, going out and witnessing this eclipse, was just fascinated by the idea that people could know the workings of the universe in such a manner that they could long before foretell the occurrences of things that have yet to come. And so Tycho goes back to college, again remember he's 14 years old, and he decides to include astronomy as part of his educational courses that he's taking in college. Now, something would occur after his time in college that would really solidify his career path into one that would become historically significant to our understanding of the universe. And so let me tell you the story. There was an evening in the late 1500s where Tycho Brahe was out walking around his estate. Legend has it he's coming back from the carriage house of his estate, heading back to the main manor of the estate. And in the year 1571, he's gathering just information about the universe as he's learning it in school and starting to apply it to what he sees in the sky. One evening, as he's walking back to his home, though, he's looking up at the sky and admiring the universe, as astronomers typically do, look up at the sky as they walk. And he notices something in the sky that he is not quite sure if it's something that had been there before. And in this illustration, he notices this bright object right here next to the constellation of Cassiopeia. So the Cassiopeia, when you look at it in the sky, sometimes looks like a W if it's oriented the right way. So it's often referred to as the W of Cassiopeia. So this bright object seemed to appear one night where he's not quite sure if this object is something that has always been there or is it something that is actually new that evening. Now, being a good student of astronomy, he is able to figure out whether or not this is something new or something that's been there by consulting the diagrams of the sky. These would be what we would call star charts today. But in the days of the Renaissance, there were charts that had been made showing the positions of the stars and the constellations. And one way to figure out if something is new or if something is normally in the sky is to consult these charts. The problem, though, is Tycho quickly realizes that the star charts of the Renaissance, the charts and maps of the sky, are really of very poor quality. And the reason is because the charts, or these maps of the sky, were made artistically rather than by making measurements. So somebody would go outside and they would look towards the constellations, they would see what it is to see, and then they would hand draw a representation of the positions of the stars as you see them in the sky. So the charts were not made by using tools to make measurements of the sky, they were instead made by just artistic impressions of what you see. And so when Tycho is consulting these charts, trying to figure out if the object he's looking at is normally there or is something that is new, he finds the quality of the charts is just not good enough to be able to answer his question. So he is very frustrated by this and decides that what is needed is to make better charts and to make maps of the sky by using instruments and tools to make accurate measurements. And so although it sounds rather trivial, this epiphany that Tycho Brahe experiences by this desire to create very accurate charts of the sky would turn out to be one of the more significant events in the history of astronomy. Just as an aside, the object that he sees in the sky turns out to be something rather new that night. It is something that had not been seen before. And today we understand that what Tycho had witnessed is what we call a supernova. And a supernova is the explosive death of a very massive star. And typically what happens when a star explodes is it becomes very, very bright during the explosion. So this means that if you look at the sky, there could be stars that are too far away for us to see, but when they die and become very bright, then suddenly it looks like there's something new added to the background of stars that is typically there night after night. So Tycho witnesses a supernova, and we call this Tycho's supernova. Of course, in 1571, he's not aware of this. This is something that we would later figure out. So Tycho's deciding to create these very, very accurate maps of the sky. And to be able to do this, of course, he needs some tools. He needs financing. And being very wealthy, you would think that somebody with great wealth would be able to purchase tools and pay for the financing of making these measurements. Well, for Tycho, though, it was important for him to not spend his own money. He'd rather spend somebody else's money. And so, as luck would have it, since he is wealthy and part of the Danish aristocracy, he is somebody who knows the king. And this is King Frederick II. And Tycho is able to go to the king and I guess cozy up to the king and become one of his friends and one of his confidants and one of his advisors to all things scientific. And as luck would have it, King Frederick is a patron of the sciences, somebody who supports the scientific endeavor. And Tycho is able to dazzle the king with all of his knowledge of astronomy. And as in response, King Frederick makes Tycho the royal astronomer. And being the royal astronomer, he's given a living wage, if you will, or an income. He's given a staff to help him do his job. He's given tools, and he's been given an observatory. So let me show you his observatory. On a small island off the coast of Denmark, Tycho is given the ability to make his observations of the sky, and he's commissioned to create an observatory. And as you can see in this portrait, this observatory was quite elaborate. He calls it Uraniborg, which means Castle of the Heavens. And inside of this observatory, he has some tools. And the tools that you can see here are shown in this portrait, and let me explain it very briefly. This is called a quadrant. And the idea of a quadrant is to make very, very accurate measurements of the sky. And by doing so, what happens is you're able to get a very, very precise measurement of the positions of the stars in the sky. And when you do this all night long, measuring the positions of the stars, you're able to turn that into a very accurate map of the sky. So the way that a quadrant works is essentially to determine the altitude of anything that you see in the sky. You observe the object through this opening here, you slide one of the parts of the quadrant until you get it all lined up, and then you simply read off the number, which gives you an accurate measurement. Now secretly, Tycho believes that the universe is indeed geocentric, but has a heliocentric component to it. And in this historical diagram here, you can see that he has the Earth as the center of all things. He's got the moon in its orbit around the Earth. He's got the sun in its orbit around the Earth, again, a geocentric model. But Tycho believes that Mercury is in orbit around the sun and that Venus is in orbit around the sun as well. So this is a bit of a hybrid, and this idea was one that was not shared by others. He believes this is something that he has discovered about the universe itself. And so quietly, he is working on making measurements to try to prove that this is, of course, the way of the universe. In the year 1597, there's a bit of a problem, and that is that King Frederick has died, and the new ruler of Denmark is not really a fan of Tycho Brahe. And so what he does is he realizes that it's time to leave Uraniborg and move on, and by this point he moves from Denmark to Czechoslovakia. He actually moves to Prague. While living in Prague, Tycho is able to continue his observations, but the one problem that he has is he has left his financing behind once the king has died and he's left Denmark. He's left his tools behind. He's able to take a few with him, and he does not have any staff, the people that are needed to help him make his measurements of the sky. So he does something quite significant, although not realizing it at the time. He solicits help from his friends, asking his friends if they know of anybody who could come work for him to be able to help him make his observations about the nighttime sky and make these very accurate measurements of various objects. And in the year 1599, somebody would appear on his doorstep looking for a job, looking for work. And this person was Johannes Kepler. Now, Kepler was a German mathematician, and he was somebody who was very interested in astronomy and was told that Tycho needed some help. And so Kepler shows up to gain employment and to work and to support Tycho. The relationship between Tycho and Kepler would not be a good one. And over the next 18 months, they would struggle with their personal relationship with each other as well as their working relationship. Tycho, secretly believing that he's figured out the correct interpretation of the universe, is fearful that Kepler is going to learn about this and claim it to be his own idea and to become famous and get fortune from this idea, whereas Tycho wants it to be his own. And so what we're going to find is the tumultuous relationship between Tycho Brahe and Johannes Kepler would ultimately lead to one of the most important transitions in the history of astronomy that would ultimately lead us down the path of the correct understanding of the workings of our universe. But we'll save that for the next segment. We're just about out of time. When we get together next time, we'll talk about what Kepler is able to do with Tycho's observations and lead us down the road of our understandings of the universe. I hope you'll join me.